Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. This is part of the Leather Archives and Museum Fireside Chat series. My name is Doug O'Keefe. I am one of the co-producers and the host of the chats. This evening, I have the distinct honor of interviewing Mr. Victor Salvo. Let's just start right at the beginning. Please tell me a bit about your family and about where you grew up.
I am Italian. For those of you who did not know, last name Salvo. I am a second generation Italian. My mother and father were both born here. My grandparents were both born in Italy. And if you've grown up Italian, you know that brings with it a certain degree of insanity. That's just part of life, and that's just kind of the way it is, and that was the environment in which I grew up. I was born in 1957, so you guys can do the math. And I feel like in many ways I straddled eras. Ike was in office, and think about how much has happened since Eisenhower was in office. And my family I was born in Little Italy, in the hospital that became Cook County Hospital, the first one. And which is now Stroger, the new fancy new building. And my family was part of the group of people that were very intrepid and set out to move to the western suburbs, which at that time were really just kind of cornfields back then. And these images that I showed up here before, which end up with my mom and Aunt Tiama, two of the biggest, hardest partying old broads you can ever imagine. They really kind of set the tone for our family. And we moved out to the suburbs. All the relatives en masse within about 18 months had all moved from Little Italy to within like 4 blocks of each other. And it was an amazing time. I, of course, was only 2 years old when that happened. So you can see what the union of all these people's genetic makeup produced. There it is. The world's most horrific baby picture. Please note the pinky and the charming accusatory look I have gazing upon everyone. This is from a series of one of the most horrific series of baby pictures ever taken, in which, of course, I'm wearing a plaid diaper. My mother was a seamstress, and she was very proud of the fact that I had these plaid diapers. This series of photographs, this is one of the best ones, is so bad that I was 35 years old before I knew the series of pictures existed. My mother was too afraid to show them to me for fear that I would seek to destroy them. I had originally wanted to turn them into a line of greeting cards called My Inner Child, because each one of them captures a different sentiment. So I have used them actually to make handmade Christmas cards over the years. But yeah, that was sort of I'm a believer in reincarnation, and I kind of think that I came to cognition and looked around and was like, what life did I pick to inhabit? And here I am 57 years later, and 6 months from when that picture was taken. So, anyway, so we moved to the suburbs and had pretty much kind of a normal, sort of a Leave It to Beaver kind of existence. I watch Leave It to Beaver every day, as my partner John can attest, and it is very much like what my life was like, except for being Italian and insane. But it was just, other than that, it was exactly like Leave It to Beaver. And, we had a very fun household. We had a household where we argued all the time. It was multi-generational. My grandmother lived with us. English is not my first language. Many people don't know that. I actually was raised speaking Italian as a child because we were not allowed to speak English in the home because my grandmother did not speak English and she thought everyone was trying to poison her. So if you spoke in a language she did not understand, she was clearly kind of a little off of her rocker for most of the time. Most of my remembrance of my grandmother, she was sort of nuts. So yeah, I did not learn how to speak English until I started Catholic grade school, basically, and obviously picked it up, except for the D's, Dems, and Do's, I suppose, for being in Chicago. So yeah, that was my background in Catholic grade school. Good times.
When we were preparing for this chat, You told me that you were bullied in school. Would you be willing to share that with us?
Yeah, and I don't think that that's terribly unusual for a gay kid. It's almost like kind of required to say that you were bullied because we just were. I mean, I know that it's hard to believe looking at that adorable child with such a pleasant look on his face that anyone would ever want to pick on him. And trust me, as I grew older, it did not get much better than that. I was looking today for some of those pictures of my childhood. It was just like, oh my God. I definitely blossomed when I hit my 30s. It was slow going. Yeah, in Catholic school, when you're little kids, everyone just sort of like plays together. And then as whatever that miraculous thing that begins to happen, like around third grade, when they start to differentiate and start to coalesce into little groups and start talking about each other. I always, like most gay boys, gravitated towards the girls, and it wasn't long before I was being called a femme and a homo and this and that. And I, of course, did not even know what those terms meant, except that they were used against me, and they obviously were not terms of endearment. So you began to get the sense early on that there was something wrong, but I was still just trying to be a little boy, and I was doing what I was told. The hard part I think about for me in a Catholic school is that my family was so super Catholic that we weren't allowed to ever challenge the church or challenge the priests or anything like that. So if something bad was happening to you in a Catholic environment, we were raised to believe that you probably deserved it. So, and as I got older and moved through that spectrum into like 6th grade, 7th grade, I think 7th grade was probably the worst, when it became physically abusive. And literally the nuns just stood there and did nothing. And today, to this day, I'm still flabbergasted because I was raised to believe that whatever the nuns and the priests said was sacrosanct. So if they weren't intervening, then clearly I deserved what was happening to me. And I've got the therapy bills to prove that I went through Catholic school. But when you're a really little kid and those are the messages that you get, and it's one particular nun, Sister Patricia, she was like 200 years old. My sister had her. She was teaching there for like 20 years after I left. And she used to say, your place in heaven is measured by how much pain you can endure in the earthly sphere. And you're like 2 years old. And this stuff gets hardwired into you, and which is the reason why I think I had a friend many years ago, Mary Farquhar, who said the very idea that any gay person can arrive at adulthood with any semblance of their marbles intact is a miracle. So that's why we are really, really tough stuff, because I survived Catholic school.
Well, your high school recently bestowed upon you the honor of Distinguished Alum. Please tell us about that.
Yes. My horrific high school graduation picture. They put this on. I was inducted into the Alumni Hall of Fame, which was startling. It was my cousin Terry's idea, and I didn't even know our high school had a Hall of Fame, let alone that I was being nominated for it. And then all of a sudden, a year later, I get this letter that I was being inducted into it, and I'm the first person that was ever inducted for gay activism, and this is in the heart of Republican DuPage County. So this is kind of like a big deal. And I went to this thing not knowing what to expect, and this is one of the first things I saw when I walked in was this horrific picture of me. The terms horrific and picture will be repeated a number of times in this presentation. And I had to finally stand up and say my piece about, how I felt about being there, and the whole thing was so surreal because obviously I was closeted in high school, most of us were, and I was in theater and all that, which has its own level of other gay people in it, of course. But I went back to that school every day fearing that I would have a repeat of what happened to me in grade school. And I started out high school determined that I was not going to have a repeat of that, but you always live in that fear. that would actually end up happening to you again. And I made it my life's mission to become like the most popular kid in school. And I was very funny, and I was very clever and creative, and I was a singer, and I was an actor, and I was a dancer, and I did all this stuff. And for some reason or another, I went through my entire high school career and was never bullied except but one time. And it was this one guy who everybody kind of hated anyway, so it wasn't like we were really, being put down that badly. But he like threatened my life outside the cafeteria for being a faggot. And it was like in that one instance, everything came flooding back to me about how worthless I was and how everything was a big joke and who was I fooling and everything. It was a horrible experience, but it was followed up a few hours later when the captain of the football team came up to me and took me aside and said, rumor has it so-and-so, I won't say the asshole's name, said he was gonna mess you up, and I just want you to know if that ever happens or if he ever says anything or does anything to you again, you just let me know. And we'll take care of it. Yeah. And well, that guy was at this thing that I went to for high school. Because he's the football coach now for my high school. And we were talking, and it came up, that conversation, and his like fiance is there, and I was like, what are the odds of that person being there? That one person. And I just wanted him to know that it was. Anyway, the rest of the evening was like really bizarre because then I had to start talking. And I didn't know what kind of a reception I was going to get from all of these folks because everybody else was a teacher, they were in business, they wrote a book, or they, everything was all like, and I was just like, all I had done was gay activism stuff. And I didn't know how it was going to be received, and it was really, really well received. And I think the next day, when I went to the homecoming pep rally to be introduced, and I wasn't going to go because I was terrified, but my cousin was like, because I had like meetings the next day or something, she's like, you have your entire rest of your life to go to meetings. You're only going to have this opportunity one time. So I went to the pep rally, and I just saw we were all going to be trotted out. I didn't know they were going to individually introduce us to the high school. So I had to walk out to the middle of a gymnasium floor announced as a gay activist in my high school, and I literally, I was so anticipating, like broken bottles being thrown at me or something, and it was like this thunderous applause, and I think part of it was that it was the pep rally, right? So you were just applauding for everything, but it was this, it had this like lightning in a bottle kind of experience, that it was really possible to move through time and have things be different. And I'm so glad that I went. I wouldn't trade that experience for anything.
I recall when we were preparing for this, you told me that you have an almost pathological fear of self-aggrandizement. How did that come about? And building on that, given that, how did the award from Will It make you feel?
To truly understand that fear for me, and it's taken me decades of therapy to get to the root of it, you really have to kind of go back to my grandmother, who came from Italy in, I think, 1912. And I'll try and rush through this story, but I think you'll get the gist of it. My grandmother was born out of wedlock in a very, very tiny Italian Catholic town of 300 people. And the man who she fell in love with was also in that town. Well, her mother disowned her, her father wouldn't claim her, so from my grandmother's earliest childhood, she was just a disowned, disembodied person, and she lived in other people's homes as a servant girl. So she had like 4 different last names because she took on the name of the household in which she was employed. And they gave her a roof over her head. Well, she had a very, very tough existence. In her 20s, she had the opportunity, the man that she loved, he had moved to America, and she got, the letter or however that happened, he was sending for her. So she packed up everything that she knew, and she took off and went to America with $30 in her pocket, did not read, did not write, did not speak English. And she came to America and was greeted at the dock, not by the man that she loved, but by his brother, whom she despised, who had sent for her under his brother's name, because he had obsessed about my grandmother, who apparently was quite lovely. And he told her, if you don't marry me, I will tell everyone I slept with you and no one will want you. And of course, she's in America. She knows no one. She has no family here. She has no choice but to marry this man she despised. And she's told everyone she would marry him, but she would murder him, because that was apparently a very popular thing to do. She did not murder him. She went on to have 5 children with him. And 2 of her children died. And she had a horrible life. He was a drunkard. Most people know my grandfather was murdered by Al Capone's driver for cheating in a card game. And every Sunday for the next several years, a basket of food was left on the doorstep of my grandmother's house by Capone's people to care for the children. Which if I had not heard this stuff from these people's own lips, I would never believe it's true. But she ended up having to raise all these kids by herself. 2 of them died from spinal meningitis. By the time I came to cognition of her, she was so mean and bitter and old and cranky, and I could never understand why she was not a hugger. She was not a happy, wonderful grandma. She did not do all that stuff that you saw grandmas do. She was a really, really mean lady, and she raised my mother without ever hugging her or appreciating her or doing anything to make her feel good. She was extremely judgmental, and we were raised with a philosophy that, and you'll get where this is coming from, never aspire to want more than you've got, because God will take away from you what you have. That was drilled into us as children. That, along with self-praise, stinks. Never be proud, never demonstrate a belief in yourself, never do any of these things. So, my sister and I were basically like psychotic by the time we were teenagers, right? And so the very idea of doing anything that brought attention to you was terrifying. So getting back to your point about self-aggrandizement, I didn't even want to tell anybody that I got this award from the high school. And you can only imagine embarking on something like the Legacy Project, which we'll talk about soon, has brought so much attention on me that I basically had to develop an alter ego just to be able to deal with it, because it's really hard for me to stand any place and talk about myself because of this hardwired fear that something will happen to me for doing it.
Well, please tell us about your political activism. What brought you to that?
Well, my first campaign that I ever worked on was for Jane Byrne. Y'all remember Jane Byrne, first and only female mayor of Chicago? I had a real thing for Jane Byrne. I adored Jane Byrne. And she became mayor of Chicago at the same time that Evita came to Chicago. So there was all of this overlap and parallel between this powerful woman. And so I worked on her 79 campaign. I worked on her failed re-election campaign. It was my first taste of electoral politics. It wasn't really activist stuff yet, but it got me thinking in terms of how politics work. And I was raised in a Democratic household, so machine politics is basically what I knew, and it made me very, very pragmatic for a political instinct. The idea of lost causes and working on them anyway had not yet occurred to me. So when I started dabbling around the edges of gay politics, it was sort of as an antidote. My father was dying from cancer, and I needed some kind of a distraction. And I started working on a campaign for someone called Dr. Ron Salvo, who ran for alderman of 44th Ward in 1986, 87. My father passed away in 86, and the primary campaign was in February of 87. And that was the first time I actually worked on anything that was gay, you know, and I met other gay people, and I really kind of got drawn into it, to be perfectly honest, because I had gone to a town meeting, and Gay and Lesbian Town Meeting became Illinois Federation for Human Rights, which became Equality Illinois. So at that very first town meeting, as Lord Rick Garcia and Art Johnson, all these folks who eventually became these huge icons, were really just there for the first time. And they were all talking about, you know, the human rights ordinance in Chicago had been defeated, and they were trying to strategize about what was going to be needed in order to get this community's act together to get that passed. So I went to that meeting, and I stood up, and I thought that we should, you know, do whatever our alderman, Bernie Hansen, is that his name, Bernie Hansen, told us to do, because he was our friend and he was good to us. I mean, it was like this. And it was because I was from the Jane Byrne School of Gay Activism. This one guy named Joanny made a beeline to me from the back of the room after I talked, and he was the campaign manager for Ron Salvo, and it's like I became like the lightning rod for what he was going to have to overcome to get people to work on this campaign. So he started working on me and talking to me and just giving me all this like rap, and just like he was so full and enthusiastic, and he was just going on and on and on. And all I could think was, oh my God, this guy is so cute. I would do anything this guy asked me to do. So that was how I got involved in my first electoral campaign. He was awesome. Joe ended up passing away. He was really the first person I knew who died from AIDS, and but he was an amazing guy and was a terrific mentor for me. So that was kind of like how it sort of got started, basically. I'm looking to see when I have to change slides.
Well, what stands out for you the most from your years as a political activist?
We are the March on Washington in 1987. From the Salvo campaign, a number of us who had worked in the campaign, and Ron did not get elected, but he only lost by like 400 votes, and it put the fear of God into Bernie Hansen, and became the world's biggest gay activist after that. And 400 people worked on that campaign. It was one of the most meticulously run by the numbers electoral campaigns, and it put the gay community in Chicago on the map. And because we came very close to defeating the first time out the incumbent. And the people that had worked on that campaign, we wanted to do something, and I had heard about that there was going to be a March on Washington in 1987, and that was something that I thought Chicago should be represented at, because of my belief that if we went there, the experience of being there would infuse us with so much energy that we would bring that back, and we would be able to move the ball forward here in Chicago. So the March on Washington, 3 critical things happened that are very germane to my career now. One was simply being there. I was the chairperson from Chicago for that march. And I never chaired or done anything in my life, and that was an amazing experience to have that kind of leadership thrust upon me. It was the first time the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quote was on display, and nothing will ever rival, no matter how big it got, nothing will ever rival stepping on it the first time. And those of you who were there know exactly what I'm talking about, because it made AIDS real. And then it was the first time that what would come to be called National Coming Out Day was celebrated October 11th. And the idea that we were supposed to embrace our shared legacy, and the juxtaposition of all those things in my mind was like, we're supposed to embrace a history that we don't know, and here we are, an entire race of people, and we're all going to die, and who is going to remember who came before us when we're gone if we don't know ourselves? So it planted the seed in my brain that we had to figure out some way to preserve, not only just preserve LGBT history and contributions to history, but actually put it out there for people to know and to learn about. And the idea that an education system would ever teach this was simply not in the cards. And I became fixated on an outdoor display that would circumvent the education system. that people would go to and would learn about it. Of course, coming back from the march, what did we have? Activism 101 in Chicago. The next several years were basically spent fighting amazing battles to get the respect of the city, to change the political structure in the city, and to find ourselves and to find our own voice. And so I was never able to work on my project because we were busy doing what we had to do and fighting these battles and burying our friends. I mean, I was telling everyone, when I was 29 years old, I didn't know anybody who was HIV positive. By the time I was 30, 6 of my friends were dead. It was unrelenting, and most of the people in this room know exactly what I'm talking about. You all saw the normal heart, just take that and multiply it times like 100, and that's what it was like. So we basically did what we had to do to keep ourselves going, and but the idea of doing something about gay history never really left my mind.
Recently, the entertainment industry has drawn attention to the late Alan Turing. For the benefit of the audience, would you explain who he was and what influence he has or has had upon you?
Well, it kind of began a little bit before Turing. I'm looking at the reflection there. This particular poster, I think, started the process for me. This was from the 1988 display that we went to for the Names Project quote. And you'll see from this poster, sometimes history gets a little too straight. It even has the original footprint on it from where we found it on the sidewalk. I wanted to preserve it exactly as it was, even inside my cracked glass, and that's still how I have it. Because I looked at that poster and I saw those names, Cole Porter and Bessie Smith and all those, and one person in particular. You heard of her, right? I had no idea about the background of Eleanor Roosevelt's life, and when people assured me that she actually was a member of this community, all I could think of was, in the face of all of our friends who were dying, was if people knew about people like Eleanor Roosevelt and that she was part of this community, maybe they just wouldn't hate us so much. We were living through a plague, and everybody was rooting for the plague, and so Roosevelt became kind of a lightning rod for me, because she represented this mystery, and I started working on this concept of, could there be a way of preserving this history and putting it out there? This little video sequence just kind of takes you through some of the creation process that I was going through. And we'll get to the point of Turing. In 1998, the city of Chicago installed the pylons on Halsted. Most people don't know that that was actually Mayor Daley's idea. And many of the people in the community were opposed to it because they thought it was going to drive down property values. Of course, within 4 years, property values had almost doubled. I'm sure one had nothing to do with the other. But once all the battles that we went through to get those pylons up were done, we were kind of left with what are we going to do with them? And I could never shake this this idea that stuff was happening and people were still being bullied the same way I was, and we needed to get this information out there. Some statistics about this. Hopefully this will be right with that. There we go. These became sort of like guideposts for me about what our actual experience was like. So when I got to the point in 1999, Time Magazine had put out a series of those top 100 so-and-sos of the 20th century. They were entertainers and this and that. And they got to the top 100 scientists of the 20th century. That brought me to Alan Turing, and I read the story about Turing, and I'm going through it, and I just reading that, and I get to the last three sentences. The man was considered the father of computer science. He wrote the original code that became binary code in 1936. And there he is. That's my muse. And he had been hired by the British government to work at Bletchley Park and coordinated the effort to break the Nazi Enigma code in World War II, which had been used to coordinate the U-boats, which traveled the North Atlantic and were sinking the ships trying to supply the European theater of the war. Because he broke the code, he and his team, the Allies were able to stop that destruction from happening, and it set the stage for D-Day. And within roughly 14 months of breaking the Nazi Enigma code, Hitler surrendered. So I'm reading this man's life, and I get to the last three sentences that he was homosexual during a time when it was illegal and considered a mental illness, and he was arrested for having admitted to having had a sexual liaison with another man. And I always stop when I do our tours and find out he wasn't caught in the act of having a sexual liaison. He simply admitted that it had occurred. And instead of arresting the person who had robbed him, they arrested him, tried and convicted, given the choice between imprisonment and chemical castration. He chose chemical castration. And they flooded his brain with female hormones, and the effect that it had was it altered his brain chemistry and he couldn't think anymore. This is a man whose entire life was spent in his mind. He's the father of artificial intelligence. The test for artificial intelligence is still called the Turing test. He couldn't think anymore, and 2 weeks before his 42nd birthday, he bit into an apple laced with cyanide and ended his life. And it's the once bitten apple that's the logo of Apple computers now. And I read this story, and if you ever had, I don't know if you've ever had a moment where it was like the lightning bolt went through you. This was the moment for me, because I burst into tears because I had been inducted into the Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame the year before. This is me with roughly a third of my family that was there. There were so many of them, they could not all fit into the picture. Mayor Daley thought it would never end. I was inducted into the Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame, and all I could think of was, who in the hell am I that I should be in the Hall of Fame when this man who changed the course of history is unknown? And it was at that point that the pipe dream of creating the Legacy Project and the Legacy Walk became an obsession.
How do you select the Legacy Project inductees? Who are some of the notables, and who are you inducting this year?
Well, some of the notables, of course, are Alan Turing. In many ways, I created the Legacy Project and ultimately the Legacy Walk just so I had some place to put a plaque for him. We also have Bayard Rustin, who is the architect of the 1963 Civil Rights Movement. Jane Addams, who's probably the most influential social justice activist in history. Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, certainly Harvey Milk. Christine Jorgensen, who's the first transgender person to come out publicly. A variety of people, and in the second year, when we did our second dedication last year, we added Walt Whitman and Frida Kahlo is in there. Anybody who knows, feel free to jump in. But it's a mixture of different folks. I always like to actually show that we did install a plaque to Alan Turing, and I'm very proud of the fact that ours is the only plaque in the world that actually says he was a gay man and what happened to him because of that. Even the plaque paid for by the gay activist community in Manchester, England, for him does not say that he was gay on it, which I think is just an outrage. And it is still the only plaque that has that. And of course, the film, The Imitation Game, is coming out in, when is it, Richard? November 17th, I think.
Later here.
And oh yeah, it was just so he's going to become really, really famous all over again. He was officially pardoned, I believe, by Queen Elizabeth for the crime of gross indecency between males for which he was convicted. It was the same crime that Oscar Wilde was convicted under. Many people worked for decades to get that to happen, but there were a lot of people who were also very upset that she did not commute the sentences for the 80,000 men who had also had their lives destroyed by that law, and I guess there are folks still working on having all those convictions overturned. So the new people coming on in just a little over a week are poet Audre Lorde, who's being sponsored by the friends and family of activist Bernita Gray. We're thrilled about that. Cole Porter, who's being sponsored by Lou Pitsley out there in the audience in memory of his father, who was a gay man who did not get to have the kind of career that he really should have had because of the expectations society placed upon him. Babe Didrikson, who was the Olympian from the early 1930s, is also the founder of the Ladies Professional Golf Association. Father Michael Judge, who was considered the saint of 9/11. He was the priest who lost his life after giving the last rites at the base of the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001. Astronaut Sally Ride is being sponsored by renowned WGN meteorologist Tom Skilling. I'm thrilled by that. Carrie Maxwell in the audience wrote that biography, which was edited then by her partner, and I received word today that there's a very strong possibility that Tam O'Shaughnessy will be coming for the party on the 18th. And I hope that actually works out. And then last but not least is David Kato, the slain Ugandan activist who was the first martyr because of the whole insanity that's happening in Uganda and in Africa right now because of the Kill the Gays bill. And the final plaque, the seventh plaque, is our first milestone, which is our commemoration of the Stonewall Riot.
Fantastic. What are some of the misconceptions about the Legacy Project?
First of all, it's not just a bunch of us sitting around and deciding who's going to be on it. A lot of people think that we're just like this little club and we just pick it, and it doesn't work that way. It's actually, anybody who knows me and how my mind works can appreciate that it is this rather Byzantine procedure that's involved. We're not academically aligned with an institution. We're not part of a cultural institution. We're a completely independent, largely activist-driven effort. So it takes lots and lots of volunteers to do the research and to bring these folks into focus. We have a nomination process. We go to our website and nominate somebody, and most of the people have actually been nominated by somebody else, and I haven't heard of 90% of the people who are on our database before I got into doing the work on it. And once they pass a threshold of academic vetting to make sure that the resources are supported, we craft biographies that go up on the website. And then about every other year, we have a team right now that's up to about 30 individuals. It's international, it's all PhDs and EDDs, librarians, archivists, biographers, the whole gamut of folks who all have a vested interest in a scholastic understanding of LGBT contributions to history. And then we are required by our agreement with the City of Chicago to approach these professionals. So we actually have them vote on who from our database should rise to the level of what we call candidates for induction from the nominees who exist. And that generally tends to be a pool of around 30 to 36 individuals at any one point in time. And that's, it's extremely diverse in all the categories you can imagine. It's also international and it spans a number of different fields. And then comes the process of actually trying to find people to sponsor them. It's, we do a pretty good job. I think we're up to like 36 countries now and 21 fields of contribution. And spanning about 4,000 years of history. So it's a really, really terrific group of folks to choose from, and we work on trying to find sponsors for them. The other thing that I think most people don't realize is that it actually is an education program, and what you see on the street is it's literally the tip of the iceberg. It's 10% of the effort. It costs the most It's an extremely costly installation, as you can imagine, but the academic work in the background, the people that we have on our board who work on the education pieces of it, everybody on the Legacy Walk has a lesson plan. There's multimedia, there's video, there's study guides. There's all this information that's been created so that we actually have a tool for people to begin to learn about this stuff. And we're not the only history website. There's plenty of them out there. Many of them are actually, I think, more sophisticated than ours, and they've been at it a lot longer. But what we have that nobody else has is an installation. And I cannot stress to you enough the significance on the part of LGBT kids who come, the hundreds who come to the street and have experienced the tour and take part in symposiums that we offer, that what it means to them to actually see those words, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, cast in bronze. Nothing rivals seeing it in person. And it's something that I'm tremendously proud of what we have achieved here. It's really everything.
What future do you see for the Legacy Project?
Oh, we have a very big future. First and foremost, we're actually in the process of rebuilding our website. And we have this website right now, which I have to tell you is very serviceable, but was created on $189 software that lives on my computer. It's actually 9 websites that are linked together now. There's over 500 pages on it. It's the biggest website that's ever been created with this software. And that it's basically held together with chewing gum and spit, I swear. So we are, a wonderful former board member has arranged for us. We're working with a developer out of Seattle who is rebuilding it on an extremely sophisticated platform, and we've got a bunch of folks that are working on migrating content. So we're very, very excited about that. We're also in preliminary negotiations about creating an app for the Legacy Project, which will actually work with, let's see if our slide is going to change. Yes, it is. Who here has heard of NFC, Near Field Communication? It will be all the rage. Everyone will be talking about it a year from now because iPhone 6 and every Apple product from this point out will have NFC built into it. It'll be the first time we were able to actually digitally link everything on the Legacy Walk to digital content about the person simply by having them scan a code or tap their phone against it. And I'm really proud of the fact that it is the first and only education-based use of NFC in the United States and the only outdoor application of it. We're working with a company out of Australia that's working with us. And if everything goes well, based upon our success with our satellite installations that we put up, we have our first and only permanent satellite installation inside Equality House in Topeka, Kansas, which is the Rainbow House across the street from the Westboro Baptist Church. We installed a tribute to, there's 18 of our bronze plaque mock-ups inside there, and over 1,000 people have traveled there from surrounding states to look at our content. And based upon that and our success when we did our remote installation in Springfield, where hundreds of people stood there and read every word, and it's very frustrating out on Halsted Street, the one that's cost the most. People are so busy texting as they're walking by there, and many of them are not actually even aware that plaques are there. But when we do these remote installations, people really, really read about it. So we've come up with an idea to create the Legacy Wall, which will be a traveling exhibit, which we hope to launch in the spring of 2015 at a couple of universities in Illinois and up into Milwaukee and Michigan and Indiana as a precursor to a national tour that will begin in the fall of 2015. If we can find the sponsors that would be necessary to do that. And what's really cool about that is that the remote installation is going to be linked to the same NFC technology, and we'll be able to gather metrics and survey data on thousands and thousands of people who will see this that have never seen this content before. That display, this is just a crude mock-up of it, will have about 60 biographies on it, and we're going to be working with GLSEN and a couple of other organizations to position this installation for 6 weeks at a time inside areas of concentrated GSAs so that we can bring as many high school kids as possible from all over the country to where this is going to be at and try and give them some of this information. One of the other things that we're working on too is my elusive dream of gateway markers at the entrance points, which right now actually I do have a meeting scheduled with someone in the mayor's office about this. It's been like 2 years that I've tried to do this to get these things going, and it basically would be bronze field tiles that people would be able to buy and have inscribed in the memory of someone who's passed, surrounding a large bronze plaque dedicating the streetscape to LGBT youth, saying, "Here's our past, the future is up to you." And then the backside of it would be a revenue generating advertising billboard that would face the street side. And that kind of revenue would go a long way towards helping an organization like ours, which is really small and desperately in need of funding. It's an incredibly expensive installation to put up and maintain. And our hope is that we will be able to get it together and launch a visitor center, possibly by the spring of 2016. And the holy grail for us is, if everything should work out and all the stars line up, is to actually have a physical museum on Halsted Street for LGBT contributions to history sometime in the 5 years or more range, which would be possible by using the revenue generated by these other tools. So that's kind of our long-range plans. A lot of it depends upon support from the community, but make no small plans.
That's amazing. But what advice can you offer people interested in preserving LGBT history?
Oh God, never have an idea. That's my advice. Never have, and if you do have it, do not put your hand up. Honestly, I am very blessed. I became obsessed with doing this many years ago. When we dedicated on October 11th, 2012, it was exactly 25 years to the day that the idea had occurred to me to do this. There are not very many people who get to actually have a dream and see it come into fruition. But I gotta tell you, if I had known then what it was gonna be like trying to get it together, I probably would have talked myself out of it, because whenever you do something like this, because this is a partnership with the city of Chicago, it's an unfunded partnership, as I am well aware. But we have to get everything approved by them. We have a user agreement to attach our objects to the publicly owned pylons. That's 100 pages long. It took 2 teams of lawyers 2 years to hammer out that agreement, because it had never been done before, because the city of Chicago assumes legal responsibility for every word on those plaques the moment they are attached to a city-owned object. And wrangling with Corporation Counsel to do that, I'm still stunned, even though in my mind's eye, for the moment, I thought that that's where we could put those plaques. For the next 10 years, it was just a sort of like secret. It's a little secret that I had. I didn't tell anybody, but every time I walked down the street, I saw those pylons, and those plaques were already on them. But I had no idea what was going to be involved with actually doing it. So the fact that they're there at all is really kind of a miracle, and it's a testament to the city of Chicago, I have to tell you, because in spite of the fact that it was not easy, I never once got shade from anybody, I never once got talked out of it, I never once was challenged about it. It was just really complicated. So anybody that really wanted to do something on this scale, I would say you really need to get your ducks lined up. It took 2 years to interview everybody, the mayor, the governor, all the elected officials, business leaders, everybody that needed to be talked to be brought on board to this, all had to happen before we even went forward with it. So there was like 2 years of prep before we went public with our declaration. We would do it in 2012. And it worked out, and I'm exceedingly blessed that it did, because of the hard work of so many people. We have a fantastic board. Some of our board members are here, tremendous volunteers, Gary's here, donors, Jim and Pat, sponsored the Leonard Malovich plaque, and if I'm forgetting somebody, please let me know. Of course, Blue's plaque is going up in 10 days. you know, and I've had a fantastic family for all the trouble and stuff that we've had. My family's been a terrific source of support for me, and my partner John has got the patience of a saint to put up with the fact that we basically live together inside a 2-room filing cabinet. That really it is. I mean, it's like that. It's just a big filing cabinet. So it's extremely difficult to do, but there is a reason for doing it, and I think that, you know, this image probably kind of says it all. You know, that message is what this project is about, stamping out. And we owe it to the next generation, because I firmly believe people of my generation are really the last ones that are not only going to care about this history, but who actually still touch that past and still know some of those people and lived through that time. I'm not taking anything away from young activists who certainly are going to have their own challenges, but we're sort of like the last talisman that really sort of remember what it was like to be in the closet. Kids are coming out when they're 10 years old now. The closet's not going to be a factor in one more generation. And everything is going to change, and I feel like it's up to us to create a sense of stewardship for the next generation, which is why the education piece of this is so important to me. And I can see it in the kids that we work with. They're just, you know, when they first come, they're sort of stunned into silence. They don't know what to expect. And by the time we're done, there's just jabbering and jabbering, because they just can't believe that they studied Jane Addams and nobody ever told them. You know, and Bayard Rustin and all these folks, and the Alan Turing thing just like stops them in their tracks. There isn't a single device we touch today that does not have a computer chip in it somewhere. You know, our contributions to history are not incidental, they are central to the actual quality of life, and we have paid an immense price for having been redacted from that history. Every single thing that's ever happened to this community has happened because we were written out of history. You know, people want to blame it on the church, they want to blame it on the politicians. Those messages would not have had resonance if the seeds had not been planted by a society that never allowed us to exist free and open in the daylight. And so, to me, this has been the most gratifying work of my life. I feel like it's really the reason why I was born into the world, was to actually do this. And, you know, it's something that's not for the faint of heart, but I can't think of anything that you would do that would be more worthwhile. So I feel very lucky.
Thank you for an amazing interview.
Thank you guys very much.